Hello, this is Kathleen with the World Economic Federation, talking today about how to use the Federation system and its programs to rebuild and reinforce international security. Because the Federation is effectively a debt repayment system, in addition to the 20% that each nation gets from their citizens' second credit sponsorship pool, they also get a fractional interest in the global energy second credit pool. This means that less developed nations automatically get support from larger industrialized nations if they participate, in order to further pay off debts and to begin to normalize their economy with the rest of the world so that it may be equitable. In other words, in time, wherever you go within the Federation, you would have a quality of life comparable to that in the U.S. under this system, since it is the same economy that is built on the same green energy sales. This allows livelihood portability for those who are having to move to escape the externalized liabilities of the fossil fuel economy that is more generally called the climate crisis. Working with Federation leadership, Ukraine would be able to leverage that fractional interest in the global energy credit pool to repay the costs of war. Furthermore, since Russia is eligible for its own interest in the global revenue, their portion can be paid as reparations to the Ukrainian government until the costs of the war are paid. Indeed, Ukraine could preemptively offer a stipend to all Russian soldiers as political refugees of Putin's Russia, to be paid by Russia's share of the future earnings, and offer them asylum within Ukraine. Of course, you may point out that the U.S. has its own fossil fuel war debts, but provided that the Federation is successful, the U.S. will be paying those debts through the protection of this system from fossil fuel interests. Russia's outright rejection of civilized decency, on the other hand, in ordering the mass murder of the Ukrainian people, mass abduction of their children, and intentionally targeting Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, is a whole other matter. So from this video forward, we will consider all of Russia's global cum forfeit until the debt is paid, and any portion of any tax elimination revenue will also be taken from the government's 20% allotment from its resident citizens' second credit revenue. Further, continued aggression against their neighbor over the fossil fuels that will eventually become worthless in the green economy will result in the oligarchs being ineligible to have accounts for anything but the UBI and healthcare, as they are human rights. While any bank that does business with us will not do business with them, and since this scenario assumes the success of the Federation, I will also point out that if taxes are eliminated, the need for tax havens goes away, and no bank in decent society would touch their money, lest they lose the steady stream of revenue they stand to generate from the Federation royalty system. If you murder Federation members over fossil fuel reserves, the Federation will have the capacity to do the equivalent of smart sanctions that do not impact innocent people, but can make the oligarchs suffer economically, and drastically so. Economics is a weapon the oligarchy has leveraged against the people to divide them. We intend to do the same to oligarchs. Unless, of course, Russia withdraws from the borders of Ukraine. Then only Putin and his closest enablers must suffer the consequences of this misadventure. Yes, the U.S. may eventually lift sanctions, but the Federation does not care about your corrupt fossil fuel politics that sees suffering as potential for profit. Through partnering with the Federation, nations have the opportunity to provide their people with a UBI, healthcare, and 21st century jobs, all along with democratic representation on the world economic stage as an individual with a powerful voice. And when the worst happens, be it hostile military incursion or natural disaster, in time there would be the Federation Humanitarian Services, which specialize in responding to disasters as they come with the resources of the Global Federation of Workers behind them, to rebuild, regrow, and restore what was destroyed by the fossil fuel industry in their wars. The only thing we cannot restore is the lives lost in their pursuit of profit. How do the Federation humanitarian services work? Well, let's take some recent examples to understand exactly what is needed. After a devastating hurricane in Puerto Rico, so much infrastructure was demolished that it's hard to imagine the scope or how to help rebuild. In such a disaster, one likely made worse by climate change, you need housing, medical care, aid workers, clean water, energy, communications, all huge endeavors. Imagine then that a humanitarian armada sets sail as soon as the storm is past to start rebuilding. Part of the Federation fleet will carry shipping containers, like an ocean-going commercial vessel, only these shipping containers will be outfitted as off-grid housing, with solar power, composting toilets, and a high tolerance for stormy weather. Another ship will bring medical care and beds for the injured, and plenty of medical supplies. Others will carry necessary technology, perhaps a nuclear-powered ship to plug in like a giant generator, water treatment services for a clean water supply, and a telecommunications hub to provide local communication services and ensure continuous coverage to make sure all aid arrives and goes where needed. Finally, of course, ships will bring personnel to finish rescue efforts and start recovery and rebuilding as soon as they can step on shore. Put that way, it seems like recovery for an island is a much easier process than a landlocked area, but the system could work similarly, using the Federation fleet to bring the necessary materials and personnel as close as possible, and then using land and air resources to complete the journey to the disaster zone. For a current example, there are undamaged ports on the Mediterranean Sea that could begin to help with the recovery from the devastation of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Given the massive scope of the damage, I am personally not qualified to assess the best ways to deliver aid and resources, but the future experts at the Federation Humanitarian Services will be amply qualified, with knowledge of the local area and the ways they can bring relief and recovery to people around the world. All this expertise and technology will come at a significant cost, of course. That is why a significant portion of the global second credit revenue will need to go to funding the Federation Humanitarian Services. Right now, your taxes go to relief efforts by the federal government. In a tax-free future, where revenue from the Federation pays for services around the world, it will extend to disaster relief as well. This will be a purely civilian effort, one that bypasses strategic questions of political maneuvering. There will not be a Federation security force. If peacekeepers are needed, or within this country the National Guard, that is a question for the international community and the local governments, who may also choose to send humanitarian resources as well. The Federation is interested in providing humanitarian services as a human right, not as a financial transaction. The simple fact is that climate change is ramping up natural disasters in the world, and while earthquakes may seem unrelated to climate change, their effects are certainly strongly affected by economics. Reports suggest that Turkish building codes were not followed or inadequate despite promises to the people. Or, looking at the recent train collision in Greece, economic austerity plans and conditions mean that safety measures were not in place, and dozens of young Greek people would be alive today if the government had had the money and the will to improve their infrastructure. Is it any wonder that we demand an economic answer to these problems before more people die from human negligence and greed? The fossil fuel economy makes the world unsafe. An economy that heals the planet itself, controlled by the people, will create a new international security and provide protection not just from bad people, but from the damage they have done both to the planet and to the structures and technology we create to live on it. The Federation wants to bring prosperity through cooperation, not conflict. If this sounds like the sort of world you want to live in, please like and subscribe. Thanks for joining us to discuss how to make capitalism pay, just like it promised.